Hey guys, welcome back for another wonderful week of our very well-attended review session. So we're going to be, we finished last time with 2.2, we're picking up with 2.3, and then we're going to be on to number 3, period 3. So if you guys all have your week 2 packets, actually period 3. So we'll start with the period 2.3, pretty short chunk of stuff right here. For those who watching the video, you know we lost out unfortunately on 2.2 last time with our technical difficulties after learning about a little bit about Christianity. So we'll have to, for those people will have to figure it out on their own, I guess. There are additional videos if you see the previous one where you can find that information, but we're going to pick up from concept 2.3. So it's talking about the trade routes that are taking place. Now some of these trade routes, they are not like specific to one period or another, right? Period 2 is 600 to 600, period 3 is 600 to 1450. Trade doesn't completely switch, right, at the year 600 CE. So some of those trade routes that are famous from one period, they do transition into the other. They might increase or decrease in importance based on certain changes, but they're all continuous in through those periods. So it mentions on here Eurasian Silk Roads, the Trans-Saharan Caravan Routes, Indian Ocean Sea Lanes, and the Mediterranean Sea Lanes. So these trade routes, right, the Silk Road is really big in period 2. A lot of the trade was primarily, so even on this map, right, this is a map of the Silk Road, but it also includes what?
The Indian Ocean.
Yeah, but you'll notice, well, we'll come back to that. There's something different about this Indian Ocean trade. But I don't know if you can see it. What do you notice about this Indian Ocean trade in terms of where it's taking place?
It's only in like the Southeast Asian going into Middle East region, not including the African, some of the ports more in Africa.
So at least on this map, we're not seeing as much connection to East Africa, right? And even though over here we do see it a bit, in general, it's very along what?
The coast. Yeah,
it's really along the coast. So there's a big shift during kind of going into period 3 that enables this trade to expand. What's that change?
The Lichine sail, and knowledge of the monsoon months.
Right, those two things, right? So that's kind of going into period 3. But we don't want to think that there was not trade taking place in the Indian Ocean before that. This trade really goes all the way back to period 1. There was trade taking place between Mesopotamia, right, and the Harappan civilization, the Indus Valley civilization in India. So this trade has been going on for a long time. It's also happening during the Roman times. The Romans are trading by ships. In fact, the Latin sail, which is really popularized during period 3, and we see East African traders and Muslim merchants using it. It's called Latin because Latin. It was the technology was developed within the Roman Empire, and it just didn't pick up as much until period 3 and was really became more common throughout the region. So we also have the Trans-Saharan trade routes. Again, some of these are ones that are going to be more influential in period 3, but we can take a look at them. So what animal makes the Trans-Saharan trade possible? Camels, man. They're amazing. It's almost like a form of technology. It's like biological technology. Camels are capable of going across deserts. They're built for the desert. They're a desert animal, and they can be ridden. They can be loaded up with goods. So that overland trade in the desert is going to be really dependent on camels. There was already trade taking place. There was already movement across deserts, but the further development and spread of domesticated camels, because camels originated in Arabia, not North Africa. So as that technology, essentially that domestic animal spreads across that region, it's going to enable more and more trade and facilitate that trade, make it easier to take place. Indian Ocean sea lanes we mentioned in the previous picture, and also the Mediterranean. Let me see if I can pull up an image of the Mediterranean during the Roman Empire. They were, we talk about the Mediterranean as a center of trade really throughout history. You guys remember some of the people in period 1 who were important in the Mediterranean trade? who was a really big deal in the Mediterranean in terms of trade early on? We mentioned them actually last time. So obviously the Romans, right, during the Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean Sea, one of the more famous examples of Mediterranean trade. Before the Romans, who was important in trade in the Mediterranean? How about right before the Romans? Not China. China is nowhere near the Mediterranean Sea. But look at who's around. Look at the neighborhoods.
Mesopotamia, Egypt.
So, right at the time of Mesopotamia and Egypt, there were other cultures that were in the Mediterranean that dominated the trade there. So Egypt is obviously connected to the Mediterranean.
Persia?
Was not
Persia?
not the Persians. They're all over there. So if you go way back, the Minoans, like you mentioned during ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, you had the Minoans on the island of Crete, right? So this is a throwback, but just to connect with this topic of Mediterranean trade. They were really a big deal in that trade. That's part of the early Greek world, right? The pre-Greek Aegean world. By the later part of period 1 going into period 2, there's another group of people. They actually originate from the Middle East. They originate from the Levant, the eastern Mediterranean coast, that become really important in the Mediterranean Sea. And I'm pretty sure we talked about them last time when we talked about period 1. They helped with the development of writing. Their writing system became the basis for Roman and Greek, Latin and Greek, as well as Hebrew, Arabic, possibly other scripts as well, but definitely other scripts as well. They were famous for a red dye and trading cedar wood. Lots of cultural diffusion around the Mediterranean. Had a settlement in what was later known as Carthage. They are the ancestors of the Carthaginians.
Nubia?
Not the Nubians, no. Mediterranean Sea. Phoenicians, very good, yes. Coming from what's modern day Lebanon, as well as Syria and Israel, Palestine. Yeah, these early Canaanite peoples that spread from what's today modern Lebanon and that region, the Levant, and spread throughout the Mediterranean. They didn't have a huge empire. They didn't conquer, vast territories. They had small settlements throughout the Mediterranean, colonies, and that was it was really a trading empire. They traded throughout the Mediterranean. Then you go on, once the Phoenicians kind of phase out, as the Greeks grow, the Phoenicians don't disappear, especially in the Western Mediterranean. They settled in Carthage as the center of their empire, and if you remember in early Roman Empire times, we had, southern Spain and parts of North Africa were controlled by the Carthaginians, and they're just the Phoenicians, right? We usually refer to them as Carthaginians because they're more famous for that city later on. But throughout that region, they were very powerful until they were conquered by the Romans. In the Eastern Mediterranean, as Greece, right, as the Greek culture starts to develop further, they'll dominate trade in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? During period 2. But then, of course, the Romans are the main dominant area. What about after the Romans? What about after the fall of Rome? Who ends up dominating the Mediterranean? I'm looking ahead into period 3 now, even period 4. But think about it. Who's in charge of the Mediterranean after Rome falls?
Byzantine Empire?
So Byzantine, yeah. During the Islamic Golden Age, you get Muslim traders. Right? The Byzantine don't go away. You have Muslim traders coming in from what they call North Africa, the Middle East, Spain. So there's more Arab and Muslim traders. And then as we move towards the Renaissance, the Italians kind of reassert their dominance, right? From Venice up here in the northeastern part of Italy, Italian traders kind of reassert their dominance. Again, we're looking ahead, but we're looking at that continuity and change element of Mediterranean trade. And really up until, we get to the modern age, it's the Italians dominate that. The Italians dominate that trade. So that's the Mediterranean trade, because I feel like we don't talk about that one as much. We talk about the trade there, but we don't always talk about it, at least in our class, as like a trade route. Maybe it's a little bit smaller than some of the other ones. But the Silk Road is obviously the biggest one, the most famous one from this period. You mentioned how later on, as those technologies spread the monsoons and knowledge of monsoons and letting sails, that trade will shift. It doesn't disappear overland, right? But the trade will shift more towards oversea. When the Mongols come in, it shifts back towards land. when the Europeans show up in the Indian Ocean, it shifts back towards sea. But none of them ever goes away. It just becomes which becomes prioritized or which is more the main thing. On the other side, it says land and water routes became the basis for interregional trade, communication, and exchange networks in the Eastern Hemisphere. So this is talking about, so new technologies permitted the use of domesticated pack animals to transport goods across longer routes. So particularly we just mentioned what animal?
Camels.
Camel, right? And then innovations in maritime technologies as well as advanced knowledge of monsoon winds. That's exactly what you just said, right? So what's the sail called?
Lateen.
Lateen sail, right? The DOW. So the name of the ship that you see, especially in like East Africa, DHOW, it uses the lateen sail. That's that triangular sail. But the ship itself is called the DOW, DHOW. In terms of Roman numeral 3, spread of crops, including rice and cotton from South Asia to the Middle East, encouraged changes in farming and irrigation techniques. And then just looking ahead at the other ones, spread of disease pathogens, diminished urban populations, contributed to the decline of some empires. So one that we can mention here in terms of disease is the Antonine Plague. I'm just jumping ahead because I want to mention that first, so we can spend more time on it. The Antonine Plague is a good example of this. When it's towards the end of what we call the Pax Romana, right? This roughly 200-year period of peace and stability and thriving economic system in Rome. One of the things that kind of leads to the fall of Rome is the introduction of disease. So this is called the Antonine Plague during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, and it was most devastating to the army because they went to Persia. They were fighting with the Persian army. At that time would have been the Sassanid, I think. I'm not sure if it was Parthian or Sassanid when they were fighting them. May have still been the Parthians at that point. But they came back from Persia and they had brought with them this disease. That when it comes to long distance wars, long distance trade, anything long distance with those exchange of populations, disease is a concern, and that weakened their military. And
Hi.
hi.
Hi, Mr. Casey.
Hi. Nice to see you.
Good.
How are you?
Good.
How's life?
Good. Bye, Mr. Casey.
Bye. It took me a moment to fully process what was happening there.
It took her like 10 seconds to say hi. She like put her head into like.
If I wasn't recording a video, I would say hello. A little more. So if you look at this for week 2, guys, just look at the packet for week 2 for period 3. Look at the first thing we see there.
So broad.
This is like everything we just talked about, right? So I don't think we need to repeat a lot of that stuff. Would you guys agree?
Yep.
I think we got the gist of it. In terms of religious and cultural traditions, including Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism, were transformed as they spread partly as a result of syncretism. So what does religious syncretism mean?
To take on beliefs from one culture and add in your cultural needs and traditions.
Right, particularly in terms of religion, we use the term religious syncretism. Some examples of religious syncretism that are taking place. Buddhism, the idea of Mahayana Buddhism. I guess we could say it's at least somewhat syncretic. Mahayana Buddhism develops as Buddhism spreads from India up into Central Asia and then into China. And it starts to change in its characteristic. There's more emphasis on things like heavenly afterlife, so nirvana becomes a little bit more tangible. And as it spreads into China, we see the introduction of certain Chinese folk figures, gods that existed in Chinese folk religion, kind of get incorporated into Buddhism and take on identities as kind of Buddhist saints or bodhisattvas, if you want to write down that word. Bodhisattvas is not a syncretic idea, but many people who already existed in Chinese culture become reimagined as bodhisattvas. Bodhisatva. Essentially, bodhisattvas are people who in Buddhist tradition have basically like made it to nirvana, but they're so awesome that you know what I'm talking about?
They guide people to nirvana?
Did you have the project on it, the museum project on what stuff is?
I don't think so.
Just remember it really. Yeah, so they're like, you know what, I could be done, but I'm gonna be so awesome when I come back, and I'm just gonna try to like bring more people to nirvana and help, spread the message of Buddhism and do good on earth. So they're like, wow, what a person, really, really thinking of others. We see in Hinduism, I mean, this is even earlier on, but we see in Hinduism like gods that existed before the Aryans came were introduced or were kind of melded into the Hindu pantheon. With Christianity, I honestly don't know if this is going to be on your test, but I mean, for religious and cultural traditions, the example I always use is Christmas and Easter. Both have very transparent, syncretic things, especially in the way we imagine in popular culture today with the Santa Claus and Easter Bunny. With the Easter Bunny and those ideas around eggs and Easter bunnies and fertility around springtime, really it connects back to pre-Christian European traditions around the seasons, around fertility rituals. There were pre-Christian Roman mystery religions that existed. I can put something for that one for sure. There were pre-Christian religions that were not just within the Roman official church, but some of the small random religions that existed. I have some good ones on this one for sure. There was the religion of Dionysus. So Dionysus was a Greek god of wine and theater and some of these kind of things, late night parties, I guess you could say. But he became an important cult that was taking place in Rome. This is actually from Pompeii, and there's a room in the Villa of the Mysteries of the cult of Dionysus, and you see some of the initiation rituals that took place for people who were joining the cult. And by cult, that doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation. It's just that this was a small religious group, often used to describe an offshoot. Early Christianity was often described as a cult. There was also the cult of Sol Invictus, the worship of the sun, the unconquerable sun, and that was and that one as well as Mithraism were very popular in the Roman military. There was bull sacrifice, very masculine kind of religious traditions, but a lot of them shared similarities with Christianity. I believe Mithra was born on December 25th, according to the traditions. There's definitely some overlap with Sol Invictus. The idea of the winter solstice is very important in sun worship, right, or sun god stories, because the sun is going away as you approach December 21st, right? It's less and less sun, and then after December 21st is the return of the sun, right? Light is coming back to the world, and so that provides a very nice kind of metaphorical symbol for Christ, right? The world is in darkness, and now light has come to earth. So great time to celebrate the birth of Jesus from a Christian perspective, right around the time of the solstice. But they weren't the first ones to come up with that idea, right? It was applied to other gods and other religions at the time. So that cult of Isis. So Mary is often compared to Isis. Isis was an Egyptian goddess who was very popular among certain Roman populations. She has her husband is Horus. Her husband is Osiris, but her son is Horus, and Horus is this important figure. And so the idea of the mother and the child, right? The depictions we see of, do you have a picture of that on here? No, I guess not. Of Mary and the baby tend to look a lot like pictures we see of Horus and Isis. That's not to say that this was copied or anything like that, but the imagery, the connections, the associations people would have already made would have helped them to kind of say, okay, well, it's kind of like this. You're familiar with this. Let's kind of help you see the connection there. Going back to this, I don't think we need to look at any pictures of this, because I know you guys know this for A, because in the other packet you guys did the homework, right? You guys drew pictures of this, so the Anat system of bringing water, right, through, remember that you guys drew? And the water wheels, wells and pumps, you guys looked at the Shaduf system that was used in Egypt, different techniques of bringing irrigation and systems that are going to be developed further during this period. Qanat system being one that's particularly popular with the AP. They like that one. And the spread of rice and cotton. So just we're seeing more and more goods being traded, new crops being moved around. So rice originated in Southeast Asia, or southern China, and didn't even exist in northern China for some time until it was spread there. So I think we can switch over to this one because it's actually a pretty smooth transition. We talked about Silk Road, Mediterranean Sea. Is there anything that I think we need to add to this? Only thing I would say with Trans-Saharan trade routes is the gold and salt exchange. So period 3, right, we're at 600 to 1450. And during this time we see, what are the 3 gold and salt empires? You guys remember?
Mali.
Mali is one, that's the middle one, probably the most famous. What is it?
Ghana.
Ghana is the first one, so Ghana, Mali. Everyone else forgets the last one.
I remember this.
So up to the next. Something you sing?
Songs.
Songhai.
Oh yeah.
We have that on there on the list. Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. So you had those the salt, right? The gold and salt trade in the deserts. They had access to these vast areas of salt. They could cut into blocks, right, and transmit them. And in West, so that's in North Africa, right? Across in the parts of the Sahara Desert. In the south, you had gold fields, right, in the rivers. You could collect gold, or they could mine for gold, and there's going to be that exchange. Now that's not the whole trade, right? That's one of the things that really stimulates that trade, that gold and salt trade. Was there already trade across the Sahara? Yes, but this is really going to make that grow tremendously, especially during this period 3, where we see the development of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. These 3 major, they're kind of overlapping in this picture, but 3 major kingdoms. I don't want to go too far into that because I think it's going to come up again elsewhere in the packet. Indian Ocean Basin, again, you know the monsoons, you know the routine sales. I think that is worthwhile there, but we can talk about the trading cities, because that's what it says, flourished and promoted the growth of powerful new trading cities. So for Trans-Saharan trade routes, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai are really important. For Indian Ocean Basin, I particularly would want to emphasize, I have it on here? For Indian Ocean Basin, I would really want to emphasize the East African city-states. So you have important states that are important cities that are emerging or are growing in importance during this Indian Ocean trade. Particularly Calicut in southern India is an important city. They're big for growing pepper. Sri Lanka is not a city, or Ceylon as it's written here. Ceylon is just another an outdated spelling of Sri Lanka, SRI_LANKA. But that's an important part of this. Like I said, the one that I think is most significant is the Swahili states. So we have along the east coast of Africa multiple cities that emerge, and you consider them city-states because they're generally not major empires. They're not all united, but they're independent states that are focused around these cities and dependent on trade, right? And of course, the downside of that is if the trade goes away, what?
Go ahead.
Yeah, you go away. That's the only thing that's keeping you around. The same thing we can see in, well, I'll come back to the Silk Road, but the Silk Road is also the case where you have cities that emerge and they're really kind of in the middle of nowhere, except for the fact that there's trade happening, right? So these states, they speak the Swahili language. Again, I don't know if it might come up again, but we can mention it here. Oh no, it is going to come up again in the next part. If you guys want to jump ahead and we just talk about it now because this is a little bit all over the place, go on to the 3rd page. C, some migrations and commercial contacts lead to the diffusion of languages throughout the region and the emergence of new languages. Do you guys see that? Mm-hmm. So Swahili, it's a language that is a mix of different Bantu languages along the east coast of Africa, plus the introduction of Arabic because you have Arab traders coming from the Muslim Middle East and interacting with people on the coast. And this is we consider like a trade language because and we see this very often in history when people are trading with each other, they need to be able to communicate. Right? How can you trade if you can't speak to each other? And so they try to find words. Sometimes we develop what we call a pidgin, or maybe a Creole. A pidgin is like a blending of languages, but like just enough to be able to communicate. But Swahili is a full-out language, and it's going to be spoken throughout these regions because it allows them to communicate with each other and trade. It has a lot of Arabic influence on it as well. Famous Swahili phrase from The Lion King, Asante sana, wewe ndugu mimi hapana, which means that's also Swahili. Yeah, Hakuna Matata. It's from Arabic. Is I believe Akun Matata. It means like be like relaxed. But Asante Sana means thank you very much. Squash banana is English. Wewe nugu mimi hapana is you are a baboon and I am not. Apparently, when they made The Lion King, some illustrator or artist was there and he heard kids saying this in like a schoolyard, like playing around, a schoolyard rhyme, so they threw it in the movie. I don't think it's going to be any guest. Still fun fact. We also have a really important city here, Malacca, in Southeast Asia, in what is today the region of Indonesia, Malaysia, right? The East Indies, as the Europeans call them, right? Why is the city of Malacca so important in particular, or this particular Strait of Malacca?
It has the water strait where all the trade goes through. So
Right, we talked about that before. I guess the choke points of water. Malacca. What's the other one that we talked about a lot? Constantinople, right? Istanbul. You have to go through here to trade, and so that's going to be a really important spot. So obviously that, and also we see in southern China some important cities pop up. The Song Dynasty dominated China during this period, not during all of it, of course, but when at the height of Indian Ocean trade, and that's when China gets the most involved with trade because if they lost northern China, they're cut off from what other route? Silk Road, right? So during the Song Dynasty, when they were based in the south, they said, all right, we got to trade somehow. We're going to